everyone. Mr. James O'Neill here, speaker and owner of Mastery for All. Mastery for All partners with school districts to bring mastery of mathematics through professional development, through coaching, and through consulting. I want to see everybody master mathematics, specifically our Black boys who have historically not mastered it in this space. And so one day I was literally on LinkedIn and there was this article titled, "Is Math a Racist Subject?" And I read that article and I said, I want to do a podcast on that. And so I'm bringing in my friends, people that I've met in the space, people that actually have reached out to me and say, hey, I want to speak to this subject about equity. And so I did not prompt them in their answers. They are literally speaking from their experiences, from the research as it relates to equitable instruction in mathematics. So I want you to sit tight. I want you to have an open mind, an open heart, an open spirit to listen and to hear these experts speak to this subject. Is math a racist subject? And I'm going to see you on the other side. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the series-long question of, is math a racist subject? I am Mr. James O'Neill, your host, and today I have another brilliant mind with me in the person of Zack Stoutimore. Zack, how are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing good and I'm excited to be here. So thank you.
I'm excited to have you and cannot wait to get into this wonderful dialogue and these questions I have prepared. But as always, they tend to flow with their own flow. So y'all know I don't just bring anybody up on the show. I have to bring in brilliant minds. And so let me tell you a little bit about Zack. Zack Stoutimore, a seasoned education professional with 15 plus years of experience, has held key roles from high school math teacher to district K-12 math specialist. His expertise spans teaching, coaching, and implementing instructional strategies. Notably, Zack has led the adoption of high-quality instructional materials and curriculum, positively shaping the educational landscape. In recent years, he's extended his influence through remote support, currently assisting math coaches in New York City and shaping math professional development in Massachusetts. Zack's commitment to improving math education is a driving force behind his impactful career, making a lasting difference in schools and districts across the country. Can we give it up for Mr. Zack Stoutimore? Let's clap it up for him. Woo, woo, woo. Great to have you on the show, Zack.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yep, and good to see you again. And so I personally know Zack. There's some people I personally know, and there are other people that, I met along the way presenting something or speaking somewhere and just be like, hey, would you like to be on the show? I research you. I stalk your bio a little bit, and I think you'll be a great person. So you can stalk Zack all you want, but he's a great person, and I'm glad to have you on the show today. So Zack, let's get into it. My first question is always the same question. And it is the question of the title of the series. Is math a racist subject? In your expertise and your experience, what are your initial thoughts, permanent thoughts, just thoughts around that question?
I think that, well, first of all, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here, and I know I've said that, but I'm excited. It's a funny question in the sense that it feels like a very loaded question in some ways. And it's a question that I've heard before. It's not something that I think is not been discussed at least a little bit. And it's something that's coming up now in like current context and culture of education. And so it's an interesting one. I think that one thing a couple of just initial thoughts are, number one is, kind of just in general, I think a lot of times we're quick to put labels on things, and I'm kind of just one of those people that's like, I think we need to kind of take our time. Some things maybe don't need to be labeled in certain ways than others. And I'm not saying that this is not a label that can't be put here. I just think that it's one of those things that we want to just make sure that before we slap a label on something, that it's actually a true thing and those sorts of things. And so I know that's what we're here to talk about is like, the question of, is math actually racist? And so I guess my very, very simple answer to that question, which is probably an oversimplification, is just that I don't believe that math as a thing can be racist at its core. And so I think that I understand the question. I understand the motives behind the question, what the question is getting at, related to math instruction, related to the history of education and teaching and learning. But I just think that just in general, math is math racist. I don't really believe that it is. And part of the reason is because when I was, even growing up, one of the things that I loved about math the most was just the finality of it. It is true. Like you get to the end, and I've even heard conversations like, you know, is 2 plus 2 actually 4, and can 2 plus 2 be whatever it wants to be? I think all those things are putting, a lot of whatever on math that's not necessarily there. I like the finality of math, that it is what it is, at the core of what math is. Now, there's other areas to discuss on education, on teaching and learning, those sorts of things. But just in my own personal opinion, I don't know if math as a subject can actually be racist in itself.
Okay. So to just put it out there, just to make sure that I'm hearing what you're saying, uh, is math racist? No, no, it's not. From what I hear you are starting to allude into is what we're going to dive deeper in, concerning instructional practices and concerning pedagogy, different things like that. It may have an impact on the way we teach math. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I think that the question, to me, the heart of the question is, what are the experiences that we're offering to our students?
Mm.
And where does racial equity live in that? Where does racism live in that? All those types of things. And I think it's present. And so that's part of the conversation. I just, maybe math as we've known it has elements of racism in them, as far as, again, those outside factors. But yes, I think that 2 plus 2 is 2, and it doesn't offend anybody that it
You
is.
said
It's
two plus
just, you
two is
can,
two.
or 4. I mean 4. Yes, thank you.
That's
But it doesn't offend it. It is what it is, and it's
right.
like you can call it something else, but it's still going to be 4.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So the finality of it, math as it is structured, um, cannot be racist. So you've kind of said, and without me prompting, like the way we teach, the way our systems have been built up, may lend itself to racist practices, inequities, within our system. So what have you seen as a 15 plus math instructor, been in the education field specifically as it relates to math? What structures do you see in place that continue to create inequities or lack of access or predictability based upon race? What have you seen with this education system as it relates to math?
Yeah, I think that, so part of that to me is, and again, like, not trying to label things in a certain way. I would be cautious to call something bad, and this is the word that I'm bringing up. But I think that ineffective instruction across the board is a real issue that teachers deal with. And so
Mhm.
I believe that some strategies are more effective than others for certain students, but I think that there are certain strategies that are just effective across the board, and certain strategies that are ineffective across the board. And so we've struggled with those things. And so then it leads into other, I think there's lots of factors that are in play. And so when we think about the opportunity gap, when we think about gaps in achievement, those sorts of things, I think that it has to do with the ineffective strategies that are being used in instruction. I think it has to do with historic factors of the ways the education system maybe was set up in the past. I think it also has to do with, historically marginalized people. I think that I don't know. I was thinking about this earlier as I was like kind of thinking about all the things that we're going to be talking about. And one of the most anti-racist people that I know in my own personal life is my mom. And she's a white lady. She's in her 70s right now. But she just has always been very anti-racist from like not just I'm against, but outspoken anti-racist and something that I grew up with. And so to me, I love that. First of all, obviously, I think that's great. But I also think that historically, um, because of our race, because of being white, that we have obviously had advantages historically that would lead to um, certain advantages maybe that are still in place now. And so I would say, I guess the way that I'm trying to say it is that even though my mom is not racist, or at least very anti-racist and continuously analyzes her own potential biases and is very conscious and aware of these kinds of things. And, there's, I'm sure, things in her that she identifies and knows are not great. I feel the same way about myself. It's like I'm constantly thinking, how am I interacting? How am I viewing situations? Those sorts of things. Um, and I'd like to think that a lot of what I do is anti-racist, but I think that historical past has set up my family for opportunities for success that other people maybe haven't had. And so even though I'm not out and out racist or trying to take advantage of my status as a white man to succeed and achieve gains that other people don't, I think that there are historical things that have led to potential opportunities that we're kind of benefiting from. Go ahead.
Yeah.
You had a question.
No, because I was going to get you to expound. I'm glad that I'm gonna come back to mom in a moment. I wrote down a question that I definitely want to unpack with that, and I think it's going to be worthwhile for the people that are either viewing or listening, or doing both. So when you talk about the historical practices, just unpack that a little bit. What do you mean? What historical practices do we that this country has engaged in, or and how has it, in your lens as being in this space of mathematics, how has it impacted, like you said, as a white male, has it impacted you, people of color, or just in general? What have you seen? Just go deeper into that.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things there, and they probably both could be long conversations, but I think that one is that educate, in my own personal opinion, education was set up in a very focused and specific way to achieve certain goals that aren't even really existent in the world today, or at least not viewed in the same way, or not worked towards in the same way. And so education, as it traditionally was started, was a very small schoolhouse with a couple of students. Summers were off because basically the calendar was built around farming and harvest season and all those types of things that we don't really think about and concern ourselves with at the current time. And so, we're in some of those systems because of the way that it was set up. And it's just the way that we've always done it, whether it makes sense right now or not, we still do it that way. I think that there was obviously strong racist leanings at that time, and out and out. I don't mean leanings to de-emphasize how terrible it was. If I can just be like totally and completely honest, I think that it was built on foundations that were just racist in nature, as far as like people were segregated, people were slavery was very active at that point. All these things that were totally unjust and extremely terrible and awful, all that sort of stuff. But I think that part of that, I think that was a factor that also was the fact that there's so many other things that were built around it. And so I think instruction, all that to say, I don't believe that instruction was really considered as far as what's the most effective instruction for students to learn. I think it was more like, here's the goal. This is exactly what we need to get from this. And let's do the very least that we can so that we can go back to our farms and be successful with those very specific things that we were already doing. and then things grew and built from there. And so I think that there is that in the education system. And so it's like this idea of direct instruction, the idea of how classrooms are even situated. A lot of that comes from the old structures of schools, and it is ineffective and maybe wasn't ever even considered effective. I don't know, but it's certainly not effective. A lot of those old structures. I think as far as just generational benefits of being white in the United States, that my family has had the opportunity to benefit from. It is the obvious fact that because of the power that white Americans have had for so long, it set us up for opportunities for success that other people don't necessarily have. And I think that even as we move into a time where, and people don't talk about it much, but I think the goal is to end racism, to end the predictability, all those sorts of things. And I think it's an achievable goal. And so if we can get there, it's going to be a day that maybe even people that are working towards it are shocked about, because we don't talk about what happens when we get there. We just kind of talk about how a lot of times we talk about how terrible things are, or how it's been so bad for so long. But sorry, I'm like bunny trails, but the idea is that I think that we've benefited. And so even though, like I said, my mom, I don't believe was acting on anything racist in her life and was examining, her thoughts, her beliefs, her feelings, her actions. There were obvious benefits that we've got generationally from being white Americans. And so it is a thing where you can look at society, and in some cases you can see where those benefits have really helped certain races, certain socioeconomic statuses of people. And so I think that that's at play, and we don't often talk about that as a thing. So even if I don't actively like live out racism or seek benefits for being a white male, I'm still like, I need to acknowledge, first of all, how terrible things were, and then to understand the benefits that I've received just because of my family history.
I
And
love that. And not to cut you off, but to cut you off
no, you're good.
because you are saying a lot of things that I'm reflecting on, and I don't want to necessarily miss this. You know, as I listen to you reflect on the history and how some people have benefited and other people have not. The system, even when you talked about the way school was intended and not really examining instructional, was it even about instruction? Was it even about the best way for students to learn? And you know, in our culture now, we're re-examining everything as it relates to who's been succeeding. I was talking to Dr. Childs yesterday. He was just pointing out some of the things that you were saying, but as a goal, like the individualistic mindset that we have, and the collectivist mindset that other cultures have, like in this country, it's been about you and what you're able to do and everything. And those that are in power stay in power because of the individualistic mindset that we have. And so I see that the person that I'm talking to today has been impacted by his mom, all right, by her beliefs, by her example. And so I want to just dive. I don't think I had a chance to dive into this concerning anybody else, but I want to dive into that and how it has impacted the way you see yourself. Okay, let me just give you a series to follow as I break this down. So I wanted you to talk about how your mom impacted the way you see the world, the way you see people, how that has impacted your educational journey, and how it continues to support all people, all races succeeding in mathematics.
Yeah, so I guess the real background is, which is a little, I don't know if it's difficult to say. It's funny because I think that we try to take on some of the characteristics of our families, and I feel that I don't know all the background and history of my name, my genealogy, all that sort of stuff, but I know that part of it was my mom's parents and a lot of her family were very racist. She grew up in like downtown or inner city Kansas City, and we have like a strong Italian background, and so they were somewhat outspoken racists, and so she really pushed back from that and ended up we moved, and I never actually lived there, but anyway, so we've been here, and so it's really affected the only because she would talk about it. She was open with it. It was one of those things where it wasn't something that never came up just by happenstance, and it wasn't something that we were afraid to talk about. So I think there's a lot of cases of families that just never have the conversation because maybe they don't feel the direct impact of racism or the effects of it in a way that makes it urgent to them, if that makes sense. And I know that there are families that do, and so it's hard to say that because that's obviously a symptom of the benefits of your status as, whatever it is, a white family doesn't necessarily feel those impacts that other families might feel. But we did talk about it. We weren't afraid to talk about it. And it was something that she brought up, something that she was very outspoken about, something that she had a lot of conflict with her family about. And so it just pushed us to be like, really examine our own beliefs and our own thoughts. And why do we even consider treating people different based on the color of their skin or certain personality traits or different things like that? And so I think growing up, I always, even as I got into education where I was able to specifically be encouraged to reflect, it was like that was kind of just a natural part of what we did. But when it was like, okay, let's sit down and reflect. I'm sorry, do you hear this?
Yeah.
It's a tornado alert
Really?
in Florida. This is the second time in the last 24 hours we've had one. Sorry.
Okay. Well,
you want me to just keep going? I think it'll be okay.
Yeah.
If we have a tornado, I may just run to a different
Well,
it'll be fine.
Out.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Where should I pick back?
So,
rambling? If I'm just
I'll come in and interrupt and ask this part of the question and have the editors put this in.
Okay.
So let me interrupt you real quick. And so how specifically did the way you were raised, rather, how did your mom impact you as it relates to you becoming an educator? Did you see differences within yourself compared to other white males or other white females that you may have known didn't have the same upbringing as you, as far as having these open conversations? How did it help you, or I'm not going to lend itself, but how did it allow you to show up in the space of education?
Yeah, I think it just helped me to be less worried about having the conversation. I feel like I am happy to engage in the conversation. I think that I'm sure there are things that I don't agree with everybody on, or that certain people don't agree with me on, and that's fine. I don't mind having that conversation, and especially about racism. I think it is it's such a terrible thing. I don't know how else to classify it, that it warrants the need to do whatever we need to do to make sure that it ends. And so I don't mind having the conversation. I know that one of the things that, typically we stand on is the fact that it's okay to be wrong. And so I kind of stand on that a lot of times. And I'm like, I'm just going to say kind of where I'm at and what I'm thinking, and push myself in that sense. And if I'm wrong and I realize that later on, then I'm okay with that. And obviously, as you get older, you realize that does happen quite a bit, where you're wrong, just in general about a lot of things. And so I'm okay with that. And I also understand that wherever somebody that I'm talking to is, that they also can be wrong. And I'm not going to take it personally. I'm just going to say, okay, we're both going to keep learning, and we're going to get better at this. And hopefully I think we will see a day, and there will be a day when racism ends, and we live in a world where it's like, you're just who you are,
Yeah. And I love, listen, you gave me a question to reflect on, like, what do we do now when it ends? Like, if we are working towards the eradication of this, what does our society look like now? Do you have an answer to that?
Well, I don't have a definite answer. I definitely know that one of the things that, because again, like we said, I've had conversations and I haven't been as shy about like thinking about it. And I never really articulated it as I did it, but I definitely thought about my own beliefs and my own perceptions of things, for a while. But when we started talking about it in the educational space, I was able to reflect and continue to reflect on racism in particular. But I definitely realized I do have other biases besides just the color of a person's skin. And so
Yeah.
it was an opportunity for me to reflect on my own, all of my potential personal biases um and just kind of examine like, is it fair for me to assume that certain students cannot master the math content or whatever, be successful in school because of whatever characteristic or quality it may be. And, I know a lot of teachers, I've had a lot of experience with teachers, and sometimes it is race, and maybe that's the really a big underlying issue.
Yeah.
A lot of times there's issues based on socioeconomic status, and we don't believe certain students can achieve because of that. I think sometimes certain students just annoy us and we write them off because of their personality and the conflict that we have with that personality. It's like, I just don't like you, so I don't think you're not gonna do well in my class, and that's, to me, it's not justice. It's not, again,
That's a
the
real
issues
teacher
and the
comment.
under,
That ain't
yeah,
made up
exactly.
space. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And the underlying background is obviously not as urgent as the historical background of racism and race and our culture and society, and things that the wrongs that have been committed. Personality disagreements are not as big of a deal as that, obviously. But I think that we always have things to examine and always have biases to work on, because we're human, and again, we're learning, and we'll continue to get better. And so hopefully the conversation eventually will be able to shift away from race into just like, what are the strategies? How can I analyze just all of my biases and really be the most effective teacher that I can be with all my students?
You know what I hear you say is we'll move on to the next big issue, like conquering
Sure.
conquering the next thing. And like I've never had someone pose that question, so I'm definitely going to be using that in the future as a prompt to get people to think through. And even in my initial thoughts, if racism has ended, we will definitely these gaps that we talk about, specifically as it relates to race and accessibility and who's actually on the top of the 1% representation as it relates to wealth and as it relates to having things access. We will definitely see those things closing because many of, like, historically, like you said, like being a white American in this country has benefits, has historically had benefits, and the way we show up and the way we see the world here. We many times look at an outward appearance and we make our biases based upon that. But there are other biases. And I know when and I'm going to get to this question here, because whenever I lift up that within my business, my company, that Mastery for All deals with the mastery of all students by highlighting the brilliance of Black boys, because historically, if I put up a proficiency table chart or whatever, and I ask you who's that bottom dot, we may not want to say it, but people that like you, like, thank God for your mom, that have had these conversations, is to be like, oh, we know who they are. Like, it's usually a Black boy, usually a boy of color, usually a person of color. Like, let's not hide away from that. Like it's hurting somebody's feelings to say that. No, we need to say it to know that we need to deal with it. I got a piece of Dr. Child's fire on me from the conversation I had with him yesterday, because he just really like put in perspective. If we really care, we will be trying to solve this problem. Point blank, period. There's just no the ins and outs. And we believe that we have the tools to solve it, or it's just let's stop talking about it. So I want to get into this because my passion has always been the success for all by making sure our Black boys are not excluded. And so what has been your experience in in making sure that all races are successful in mathematics. But more importantly, I can say more importantly, but more specifically, our Black boys. What do you feel has been the issue with Black boys being successful in math?
Yeah, I think that a lot of what we've talked about has affected specifically that. I think the historical context of education in the United States and the historical benefits of white Americans over the years, generationally, and sometimes even in like again, like now maybe the the number one issue that I deal with is not my own personal racism, not that I'm not constantly analyzing my biases and potential racism, but it is the idea that I have those benefits. I think that plays into it. I think ineffective teaching strategies just across the board plays into it. And so I think that going into and saying what are we really doing for our students? What are we doing for all of our students? What are we doing specifically for Black boys to help ensure that they're effective in mathematics? And I think that we're a lot of times missing the mark. I think that it is um, it's something ingrained in teachers. I was just writing some things down before this, and even just thinking, I think that teachers are one of the reasons so stuck in the this is the way that I learned, this is the way that I've always taught kind of mantra, is because it's scary to kind of step outside of that and
Yep.
say, what's the actual most effective thing? And so really even teacher efficacy and building in a teacher's belief that they can be successful and manage instruction in the way that's gonna be the most beneficial for all students, is it's huge. Building that is a big deal because we got to have our teachers believing and knowing that they can be successful at helping our students be successful. And so I think all those things kind of play in together, and it's kind of just resulted in this outcome where we're seeing this gap in achievement, and I think it's fixable. It's funny because when you said the words, when we see the end of racism, and nobody says that, and it was even a shock. Like we've come up with this idea together in the podcast almost. Like, why aren't we talking about it? And it still is a shock to hear the words because nobody actually says it. But I think, I think that we have to focus on high quality instruction, and make sure that we're doing that. And so I don't know. The why is harder to answer. I'll just say that the why
Yeah.
is harder to answer. I think it's the things that we've talked about, which is I'm not going to reiterate all of those things, but all those things. And so I hope that doesn't seem like de-emphasizing that. Um,
I don't think
and
it's
then
going.
I would
Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to say the only thing I would say, and I don't think that neither of us are implying this now, but I would say that the answer is not to lower the standards for certain students, particularly Black boys. I think that we need to acknowledge history and flaws, and then I think that we need to move forward with the solutions and say, why has this happened, and how do we fix that, and what's the instruction need to look like so that we can make sure that all students are achieving.
Yeah, I can tell you what I hear when you said that. Like even when you pointed out the fear of us changing, that is one thing to acknowledge. But when you said that, I thought about the antithesis. I keep always jack up the word of that,
Right.
which will be the opposite, is what I'm saying, is are we, why aren't we fearful of the fact that we've been teaching for years and we're still getting the same results? Like, that's scary to me. Like, I remember when I
Yeah.
walked into a school that was an A+ school, stayed there for years. I loved my school before I went full time. And I was just like, oh, this is a school where all the Black and brown people send their kids because this school has a theme of excellence. And when I went into the classrooms and I was teaching Math 1, and there was a Math 1-2 course, we have integrated math. And I looked in the classroom and I was like, our school is 60% Black. Half of those kids are broken up into male and female. So 30% of our school identify as Black boys, and 0% of them are in this high level math class. Zero.
Mm.
There's not one child represented as a black male in that class. And I said to myself, I can't be the black math teacher and not have any representation because it's sending a message. Like for me, that was way more louder than my fear to like, I'm gonna need to say something. So I went to my principal and I started a club to increase that. And we started like having conversations to that because I know what we say as people that is scary, and we acknowledge what people are saying. Like to come out of your comfort and to do something different. Let's just acknowledge, like we're built for safety. Like that's our human. It's a human need for us. But we are
Yeah.
in a profession that proclaims that we want to prepare kids for the future and support them. And so I hear that when you said that, it struck a chord with me because that fear has to be greater than my fear for change. And because it has not been, and the confidence to actually shift those things, we continue to step into a classroom. And at the end of the day, we blame the kids. And those kids look like a certain amount of kids, and they identify a certain way. And so we get the same cycles over and over again. But you said something, and I'm going to bring this to a whole because you stirred me up a little bit because that just hit me a little bit, Zach. But you said, and you keep coming back to it, wrote it down, ineffective instruction. So I want to dive into that. What does effective instruction look like so that all our kids are mastering the beauty of mathematics?
Yeah, so I think that it's interesting because one of the things that I was thinking while you were talking about that is in agreement to what you were saying is just that one of the, like I mentioned, the solution is not lowering the standards. And it's interesting because it's almost the exact opposite. It's exactly what you're saying is we need to raise the standards. Maybe not raise, but raise our expectation of students' ability to achieve those standards. And then we got to put that out in front of our kids and say, you know, these black boys and like in your school that are not in the upper level advanced class, whatever it is, this is the expectation. This is where you're going to be, and you have to be here. And this is the standard that we're going to hold you to, and make sure that they understand that and know that. And I think that, I think a big symptom in even going back to the question of why is the achievement gap there, or why are black boys typically the ones that are not achieving or having the lowest scores in a proficiency is because maybe they're not feeling that expectation and belief that they can succeed. And so that's part of it. I know that that's not exactly, expectation is not exactly a instructional strategy, but it lives in every instructional strategy that we do, because we have to believe that our students can succeed. We have to believe that I can give them grade level content. And then I think that, going back to even the conversation that we had about how school is set up. So we have classrooms with 20 to 30 kids, and the teacher, my typical experience, which is I think most people's typical experience when I was a student, was sitting in the classroom and the teacher lectured and I listened and I took notes and we did example problems together. And then I had a bunch of homework and I worked on 20 or 30 problems and then I came back. Well, it worked for me because I was the one kid in my class. There was a couple of us in the class, but for most of the kids, and this is, I think, why kids hate math so much, is because their experience is so disconnected from actually understanding, and it just takes so long to get into the actual math. And so effective instruction looks like students thinking and talking about mathematics. It looks like them being the ones that are doing the math, and they're doing it early and they're doing it often. I think that it involves building understanding and fluency. And I think it involves applying mathematical understanding to other ways. And so I know I've hit like the rigor topics in there, and I know that there's a lot of stuff, but I really believe that I think that when you talk about fluency, when you talk about understanding, a lot of times we have this pendulum where we swing one way or the other. And for a long time, we've been on the fluency side where it's like fluency, fluency, fluency. We have no understanding. Mm-hmm. I think we are swinging back, but the concern is that we swing too far to like all we want is understanding, but we have to be able to fluently and find answers sometimes quickly, or at least the most efficient way to do it. And so we can balance that, see some application in there. But I think it really comes down to talking about the math, thinking about the math, doing the math. And if we get our students doing it, there's a lot of ways that we can do that. And I've seen a lot of different curriculums that build it in different ways. But the teacher has to change from I'm the leader, I'm the one doing everything, to I'm giving you the ability to do, and I'm making sure it's connected back to the grade level work.
Yeah, I love it. You said you always say a lot, Zach. So I'm glad we're having this conversation, sir. But to piggyback on to a previous topic in our conversation when we talked about historically why some achieve and why some don't, we really believe in the way that you and I sat in the classroom and may have fell in love with math, that's the only way. And so historically, you have a system that says like mimic me, copy me. If you can be like me, I'm the person with all the knowledge. If you can do exactly as I do, then you too can be successful in this topic. And it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the mold for many of our students, and definitely as we look historically, it doesn't fit the mold for many of our Black boys. And so we say, well, they can't. Well, you're right. Most of us don't identify that way. We don't want, you're trying to change who we are to assimilate to something that has historically worked for white America. And so, of course, at the end of the day, that I'm not going to get the same results because you're asking me to put something on my foot that doesn't fit. It's not my size. And so I get that from what you're saying. And so we have to change that. Also, the fact that raising the expectation, there's also an expectation for us, like I said, to fit a mold that we necessarily doesn't fit. But if we raise the expectation of believing that all can and then live up to that, we will start seeing other students who actually benefit and will fall in love with mathematics. And then the way you say it's presented, thinking about and talking, getting kids talking about mathematics again, believing in them, getting them talking early and frequently about their thoughts and their thinking and their brilliance around the subject. And so when I hear all that you're saying, if I had a classroom like that, and if I didn't like math the way I like it, it will make me buy in more because it's relevant to my life. I get to speak. And in the culture that we're living in, our kids want a voice all the time. They always want to lift their voice. And so if there is anything that you believe that you would change about mathematics education in this country, what would that be?
Do you mean it specifically in the classroom or just big picture everything?
Big picture in the classroom. I'll just land on
well
you.
I'll say one of the things that what you said made me think was the irony of teaching the way that we were taught is that I know for a fact in my math class, like I remember there were 2, maybe 3 of us that actually liked math and everybody else hated it. And so it's funny to hear you and us both be like, this is how we learn. So this is how we teach. And it's like, why would we ever think that that's going to be effective for a majority of our students?
Right.
But the other thing I would say too, which I think is an interesting thought, and I heard you say it, and I hear people say it all the time, is that the way that the classroom is typically set up is for the benefit of white America or white men or whatever it is. And I think to me, the irony is it's also nobody benefits from the direct instruction model that we're using. I think that's where some of the historical background of benefit comes in because it's a little bit because of those benefits that I've received, I'm in a different place sometimes than my counterparts who are Black or brown students. And so I think that's, and again, that's a very generalization. And so like you're obviously achieved really well in that situation, but I don't think it lends itself to anybody. Everybody needs to be talking about math. Everybody needs to be engaging. So if I would change anything, it would be that. It would be to get teachers to see that the most effective instruction is to allow students to do the math. I think we get nervous when we get into talking about problem-based math instruction because teachers feel like that just is like, here's some problems and go figure it out. That's not what we're talking about. What I believe is like, here's some math, and the teacher helps students make the connection to the goal and the grade level content that we're working on. And I think that that's a huge way to make sure that instruction, or that's the thing that needs to change. We need to get that math in front of students and then change our role into helping them make those connections. I'm asking the right questions. And I think high quality curriculum helps do that, because the teacher, like, I've seen a lot of teachers who are focusing on what am I going to teach instead of how am I going to teach it. And I think if we can get into the focus of how do I put this good quality instruction in front of students? How do I offer just in time supports?
Yeah.
How do I do all those things? Then I think that we see growth and achievement. And I'll say, sorry, last thing. I just think it's funny because thinking about this was the other thing I thought when you were talking about your school and our expectations. On the flip side of that, I've been in classes with teachers that are like, well, I'm going to keep teaching the way I am because I have 50% achievement mastery on the end of course assessment. And like, they're proud of that because it's above the state average or something of the amount of students that have achieved. I'm like,
Yeah.
half your students did not achieve mastery, and you're proud. I understand that you want to be above the average, and I get that, but it's also like
The bar is
you
low.
surely see, yes, you see the problem, right? This is not good.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
It's funny. I have a post coming out that specifically talks about that, and how because after we came back to after the pandemic, like, right. So when I was still in the classroom, it's only been 4 months I haven't been in the classroom, right? The level of proficiency went down. There were definitely gaps of understanding, everything like that, but the level of growth went up. And so it was for me, yes, I am going to go back to the drawing board and figure out what do I need to do to make sure growth and proficiency are happening, because all a kid and all it seems like we care about is who's proficient or not, right? And so, but I know in the time that a kid is in my classroom,
Mm-hmm.
they are becoming way more confident in math. They're just believing that they can do it. They are mad. I'll say this, and I'll go to our last question. But I see mindsets of kids just being like, man, I thought I was going to get an A on that test, and I'm just like, I don't say anything. I'm observing. I'm just like, when's the last time they ever thought that before? Like,
Yeah.
when's the last time they thought that I'm mad I ain't get an A? This 86 ain't good enough for me. Like, in times past,
Yeah.
the 86 would be all they would have been dancing and happy about. And so I know, like what it means to grow kids and support that growth, and to make sure that they are internalizing that and owning that. And that happens in a classroom that you just described. You let the kids talk, you let the kids make connections, you let the kids discover, you take your hands off as much as the I do, you do, we do models, these models that I grew up, how I entered education. And I realized that when they started asking me why, I didn't know why. And then when I learned why, I was like, why would I keep that information from my kids? That's empowering. Like, I want them to love
Yeah.
it as much as I love it. And so I love what you said. And if we had a math president, I'll definitely vote for you. And so, so my last question, Zach, is always a personal question, is basically this: what is your personal mission to the advancement of all students in mathematics education?
Yeah, I feel like this answer should be very long because it's such a huge thing. But I think that the very simple basics of it is this: that I want to see all students and teachers achieve their full potential. And so I feel like we have to throw the teachers, not throw them in there like as an afterthought,
Mm-hmm.
but it's almost equally as important because the teachers have to believe that they can help students achieve their full potential. And I believe that we just want to see all students achieve. So it's all students, all teachers, their full potential in mathematics achievement and excellence.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Zach, this has been definitely fruitful. It's been stirring for me. And I know to the people that are either watching and listening, and just listening, if they're not watching, that they are definitely inspired by your passion and your commitment to making sure that all our kids master mathematics. And so I appreciate your personal mission. I appreciate your stability in this space and your heart and your efficiency to making sure that our kids have success here. So, Zack, again, first question was, is math a racist subject? You say what, Zack?
Math is not racist.
Math is
That's
not racist.
my opinion. I do not believe math is racist.
No, it is not racist. Everyone, I appreciate you listening. This has been episode 10 of Is Math a Racist Subject with my boy, Zack Stoutimore. And I'm glad that you had a chance to listen and be empowered by his journey, his expertise. Have a great day, everybody. Listen, I hope you got everything you needed from this episode. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, do what you got to do to get this message out. As we talk about getting the message out, I would love to extend the offer to work with you and your teachers, whether it be a speaker, whether it be professional development, consulting, or even coaching. I am about that mastery for all life. So I want to extend that offer to you. My information is on the screen. But above all else, I'm super excited that you had space enough to welcome me into wherever you're listening to me at, all right? So I'm super excited that you decided to join me. Today. Have an amazing day.